Hello and welcome to Armenian news network Groong. This week in review, we will focus on the catastrophic explosion in the port of Beirut. The unprecedented destruction centered at the port, which is especially close to many Armenian community neighborhoods, has deeply affected the Lebanese Armenian community, leaving over a dozen of its members dead, hundreds injured, and tens of thousands without means or shelter. The damage to Lebanon and its people is incalculable. For this story, we turn to Osped Bedrosyan.
On August 4th, a massive explosion hit Beirut's harbor, completely obliterating the port and creating a disaster area with a 20-mile radius. While the investigation into the causes of the explosion is still underway, one thing is for sure, that Lebanon now needs major foreign assistance. With over a year of economic and health issues compounded, Lebanese society is on the brink of collapse. As part of the country's socio-economic and political fabric, the Armenian community in Lebanon has also found itself on a crossroad regarding its future. In this segment, we explore the possible future that Lebanon in general and the Lebanese Armenian community is facing amidst these turbulent times. Our guests today are Professor Osped Kochigyan, who is a senior lecturer of political science and international relations at Bentley University in Massachusetts, where he teaches courses on the Middle East and former Soviet space. Professor Kochigyan is also a consultant for international organizations on issues of judicial reform, ways to combat radicalization, and on ethnic and religious minorities. And we have 𝐂𝐤𝐤 𝐊𝐿, who is a regional analyst and researcher based in Beirut with expertise in China's geopolitical and energy security interests in Iran and the Persian Gulf. He is the regional officer of Women in War, a gender-based think tank and a contributor to various media outlets. 𝐊𝐿 is the presenter of Turkey Today, a weekly program on Radio Voice of Van in Lebanon. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Osped Kochigyan, could you provide a brief overview of the socio-political landscape that Lebanon is currently operating in and the future prospects?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is a joke by the Iranian-American comedian Maz Jobrani a couple of years ago. He actually, while doing a stand-up, he said, there's something wrong in the Middle East when Lebanon is the most stable country in the region. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. In the last year and a half, specifically, of course, ongoing, the reverberations of the civil war and the post-civil war political quagmire has persisted in Lebanon. The acceleration and intensification of the tension and the political, socio-political, and economic issues started happening about a year ago or so, with several sort of domino effect or several pieces of domino falling at the same time rather than domino effect. On the one hand, you had the growing socioeconomic difficulties that the population, the growing rate of poverty in the country, and the government's inability to address those issues, coupled with the civil war in Syria and the embargo and the sanctions that Lebanon, because of specifically the Hezbollah party, which was engaged, which is part of the fabric of the Lebanese political system, they were subjugated to sanctions from which the Lebanese population overall suffered from. And then there were a couple of things compounded: the COVID-19 case, the issue of the economic downturn. The Lebanese currency has been devaluated almost 80%, over 80% since October 2019. People are not able to access hard currency. And on top of this, you witness the explosion that you just mentioned, Osped. Fascinating thing for me is that over the last, and I have lived and witnessed this, lived in Lebanon, not far from the harbor, basically. I saw armies coming in, fighting happening, but at the end of the day, the straw that broke the camel's back was the responsibility or was the end result of criminal negligence as well as inability and incapability of the government, the Lebanese government itself, to take care of its citizens. So it is within this context that this explosion manifested itself higher or more strongly. And according to the latest news, the people are really fed up. People have stormed, according to the latest results at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Lebanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A lot of politicians are resigning their positions from the parliament or the government. I don't know if it's a genuine or just trying to dodge the bullet of the anger that the people have. But that is, in a nutshell, in a very, very large, nebular way, the overall background of what Lebanon is standing now.
𝐂𝐤𝐤, can you put where Lebanon is today in the context of the economic collapse and the free fall of its currency in the past year?
Yes. So, actually, the crisis started. I mean, it started before the revolution, actually. It's not started just during the revolution, that we started to see that the currency was devaluating from almost August, late August, and in October it was intensified, and we have seen that it reached its peak in June, when the Lebanese currency, which was the lira, with respect to dollars, it was 1,500 Lebanese lira. I mean, the official currency rate. In the mid of June, it reached to almost to 14,000. Now it is almost stabilized to 8,000 something. Of course, this has also the economic roots are also that we have only service sector. We don't have industrial sector in Lebanon. We don't have agricultural sector. We don't produce anything. We don't export almost nothing. So we just rely on the service sector. And when the banking sector was hit, the whole economy collapsed. This problem also caused during the neoliberal policies that started in 1992, which was based on just tourism and the banking sector. And of course, here we should also mention that the US sanctions hit the economy hard.
Given this socio-political and economic context, what do you think, Yeryat, are the challenges and opportunities for the Lebanese Armenian community in the coming months and possibly years?
We were not expecting this huge catastrophe, actually. I mean, for me, yesterday I was just talking with friends that, it is a miracle that this community has survived 8 months. I mean, from October until now. Seriously, this is a miracle. Not just the Armenian community, but the whole Lebanese population. Just imagine if you have 3 kids and you will buy a milk. Like a powder milk, a box now costs almost $40. So if you have 3 kids, it means you will pay $120. And your monthly salary is like less than $100. So just imagine, and I'm not talking about registration, the school registration, the university and everything. This is just, I'm talking about basic foods. We don't have electricity, almost 18 hours without electricity. So just imagine how you will be productive in your work. The community started to struggle in the mid-October. So there was some committees organized and mobilized by the political parties, the church, AGBU and everyone. And then I think it was mid-February or the end of February, where the Armenian Revolution Federation initiated Stop Marmin for the Corona. It was a committee to address the Corona issue, and all political parties and the organization also joined the initiative. And then this initiative also started to provide economic aid. There was fundraising in Canada, in US to also address this issue. The church provided a lot of funding from outside. Even Armenia, all Armenian fund, they also provided funding for the Armenian schools because our schools were we were literally if it continues like this, we may see that almost our schools will be closed. Already, I think 1 or 2 schools were closed 2 months ago. I think this is before the explosion. I'm saying that there is literally economic crisis, economic struggle. There is no middle class now. There is no Armenian middle class. And with the explosion, everything it turned upside down. The business and the shops, the industrial center of Beirut, which is usually greater Beirut, I'm talking Bush Hamoud and so on. Now they are all destroyed. So what the economics are estimating that there is almost between 15 to 16 billions of dollar damage. So the damage of the port is between 5 to 6 billions, and the surrounding areas, that is the whole area which is called Armenia Street, coming from 𝐂𝐬𝐿, Marmikhail, Nor Hajan to Bush Hamoud, all the shops are destroyed. So today and yesterday I was walking, I was literally crying. The Armenian restaurants, the cinemas, the community centers, the clubs, the church, the houses, everything destroyed. So you need a lot of that. I mean, we need literally foreign direct investment. We don't just need few $100,000 or millions. We need really foreign direct investments to renovate these shops, and we cannot also just trust that the Lebanese Armenians will be able to renovate them, because there is nothing's middle class. It is destroyed.
Asbet Kochigyan, I'm interested in hearing what you think about this, whether this, let's put this in the context of some of the talk we've heard about repatriation of Armenian communities to Hayastan. Is this an opportunity for the Armenian community in Lebanon, or is this a place where they have to rebuild where they are?
Right. Before going on, I just have to mention one thing to comment on addition to what 𝐤𝐤𝐤 mentioned. 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago, Haiti suffered from a massive earthquake and a massive tsunami. And there were about $20 billion pledged to rebuild Haiti. 10 years later, they're still in a messy situation. Not because of to some extent, because the pledges didn't arrive, but mostly because the government continued its corrupt ways. So a country that had an opportunity to reset, to build from scratch, literally from scratch, had lost that opportunity. And I'm worried that the same thing might happen to Lebanon, even if the foreign direct investments come in, even if the aid comes in. Moving on to the overall Armenian repatriation, or Armenians from Lebanon moving to Armenia. In recent years, when I was visiting Syria and Lebanon, I conducted some field work in both countries, and I talked with a lot of people in the community, people who are not necessarily members of the community per se, but people and not necessarily decision makers, but in the middle, sort of middle management, let's call it this way. One of the major issues, especially in Syria and Lebanon, is that I fear, or I have had a sense, that the community leadership in both those countries has not been actively encouraging their population, their community, to move to Armenia. I mean, one of the things I can always think of is that back in 1970s, 1980s, when the Civil War, especially late 80s, right before the Israeli invasion and immediately after in 1982, people who left Lebanon, Armenians who left Lebanon, were basically ostracized. Because why do you leave Lebanon? The attitude is that, no, you have to stay here. And this is coming from the community leadership. And I know a lot of people who left and they were ostracized from the community, people who were members of different organizations, AGBU or ARF specifically. They were pushed out of the party or pushed out of the organization because they were traitors. Let's call it this way. The same thing happened in Syria. So overall, at the beginning of the war, there were always the messages: wait, things will get better. Wait, things will get better. I doubt that line can work in Lebanon today, right now, after the explosion. Now, in terms of policies of pushing, I think that in terms of the burden, quote unquote, the burden of getting Armenians not en masse. I don't believe that this is going to be en masse migration, exodus. Let's put it that way. There are so many factors that have to be considered. The capabilities of the Armenian government, to what extent they are able to absorb the incoming people, even if they come en masse, which I doubt that it would be. But then on the other hand, I think there is, to a large extent, again, nothing scientific, very subjective argument I'm making here, is that the Lebanese Armenians are still attached to their home, even with the destruction and so on, and they'd rather stay and reconstruct. Now, the problem is, 𝐤𝐤𝐤 mentioned that there is no middle class Armenian. There is no middle class in Lebanon at all now. In general, 70% of the population live on below the poverty line, as defined by the UN. Now, if you're going to have a plan to bring people to Armenia, most often than not, the recent policies have always targeted professionals or people who have money. I have a couple of $100,000 in my pocket or whatever. I go and get an apartment, and then I oscillate between, let's say, Beirut and Armenia. And now maybe because the situation is worse, I'll go there. But what about, the remaining 30,000, 40,000 Armenians who don't have the means? They don't have the means. If they have money in the bank, they can't take it out. In the case of my family, they destroyed it. They didn't have money and they don't have a house now. So how are they going to move there? There is this naivete, I think, in terms of the demagoguery that goes on in Armenia. All Armenians have to come back and so on. I think that is, misguided sense of hope that they're getting to people. Excuse me. One thing I want to add is that at least some of the things that can be facilitated is actually, they have started that before by the Armenian government, is allow Armenians to obtain the citizenship on a faster track. So they have the option, at least have the option, not necessarily they will go there, but at least have that option to move to Armenia freely.
𝐤𝐤𝐤, your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, I agree with Asbet. I'd also want to add that sometimes, it is becoming offensive for us. Like, okay, leave Lebanon and come to Armenia. We can't, like, literally, we cannot. For example, I will give just my case. My dad is sick, my mom is sick. I just graduated. I mean, my house, it's for me, it's an apartment, so I cannot sell it. To whom I should sell it? So it's not easy, to leave everything come. Especially, there is no project. I was just hearing the interview after Zares. I mean, like, there is no, for God's sake, there is no project. There should be a project between not just the diaspora and the Armenian government, but I don't know, maybe the Armenian government should initiate a project.
One more question. Regardless of the projects and the initiatives and the wish lists and the dreams, for the Armenian community in Lebanon, is it the right thing to even think about repatriation? Or is it more like you said, foreign direct investment is the better way to go?
I think we have the freedom to choose between the two options. I mean, those who are attacked, when it comes to, for example, the businessman and so on, they can renovate. Yes, they will find definitely challenges. But I also think that this is a bit, it goes to a lot of geopolitical analysis, that I don't think that the great powers will leave Lebanon like this. Because if they will leave Lebanon like this, it means that Lebanon will definitely be forced to join to the so-called Chinese Iranian Eastern Axis that now they are talking. Because even before the explosion, there were rumors that the Chinese offered $12.5 billion of renovation, the investment in the infrastructure. There was also negotiation between the Lebanese government and the IMF. So if the Chinese, for example, now they say that we are ready. Actually, yes, today they came and they said that we are ready to renovate the Beirut port. And this is also concerning. And for me, at least an Armenian. So if the Chinese say that, yes, we will also renovate the port, and the Americans and the Europeans, they say that our aid is conditioned unless you demilitarize Hezbollah, then the Lebanese government will be forced to choose the Chinese, Iranian, and so forth. So there is also this geopolitical aspect. And in between them, I think a lot of Armenians, especially the youth, those who are like, say, they are experts or they have the IT and so on background, they will repatriate to Armenia definitely. But for example, when it comes to elderly or those who are very attached, I don't think they, at least in the short moment, they are thinking about repatriation.
Yeah, I would like to add that one of the other things is that, again, the problem of coming up with a grand strategy about patriation or immigration of Armenians from all over the world to Armenia and so on is highly problematic, because even in the case of Lebanon, as Yeria mentioned, it's a case by case basis. You cannot say, oh, all Lebanese want to come, or 30% of the Lebanese want to come, or Lebanese Armenians want to come, and so on. There are so many nuances and conditions that are constantly in flux, right? But before, for instance, the explosion, people who still had a place, they were, their place, the rent was manageable, they had some income, they wouldn't have never thought about moving to Armenia. But now you ask the same people, they have lost everything. I don't have anything. I only have my $500 in my pocket. What is it that I have to lose? I'll go to Armenia. If they're going to provide me with housing, free housing, this and that, they would go. So that's my major concern about policies from Armenia coming out to encourage people to move. It's not applicable to everyone. And add to that, I want to go a bit further than this, and I also feel that Armenian community leadership in Lebanon, in Syria, if the population bleeds out, migrates, they won't have any foundations. They won't have any people that they would follow them. So there's also that element of self-preservation of the bureaucracy, of the existing structures, because with the decline of the population, their power, their influence also would decline.
Yeria, any final thoughts?
I agree. And I think the coming days, they will show to which direction Lebanon and Lebanese Armenians are heading. I think next week there is a conference headed by Macron about this issue, whether the international aid will be directed to Lebanon or no. And in case in the coming weeks we don't see we don't sense anything about international direct aid, it means that we have no option just to think about repatriation, because we cannot exist like this.
Complex problems, complex thoughts. Yeria Tashjian, Aspet Kochigyan, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome back to our lightning round of headlines from the past week. I'm Aspet Bedrosian and I'm joined today by Aspet Kochigyan, Hovik Manucharyan, Emil Sanamian, and Alem Zamanian. Emil, let's start with these Turkey-Azerbaijan military exercises named the Turaz Eagle exercises, which started on July 29th and are planned to end on August 10th. The drills had a very wide geographic scope, from Baku to Nakhichevan to Ganja, Kurdamir, Yevlakh. That's basically all over Azerbaijan. There have been videos released on Twitter from the Azerbaijan Ministry of Defense about these exercises, which Armenia says is following very closely. What's the message Turkey and Azerbaijan are sending, and what's the message that Armenia and Russia are receiving?
Hello, everybody. Certainly this exercise was outcome of the recent clashes on the Armenian-Azerbaijani border that obviously were a significant blow for Ilham Aliyev and his government. While the clashes were still ongoing, he dispatched some senior military officials to Ankara who met with the defense minister, sort of got pledges of support. So this was a show of support by Turkish government, Turkish military for Azerbaijan. If we look at the history of Turkish-Azerbaijani exercises in the last few years, we've seen sort of an expansion of frequency and the size of exercises. If we look since 2016, for example, in 2018 I have a note on 4 different sets of exercises. In 2019 you already have 7 different exercises. So this particular exercise was actually the first exercise between Turkey and Azerbaijan this year, at least the one that was reported. And, it was a sort of obviously coronavirus pandemic had delayed normally scheduled exercises. And typically what they would have is they would have an exercise in Nakhchivan, possibly in parallel an exercise in Baku, and then they would have an Air Force exercise. This is the Eagle exercise that they have also every year, either in Azerbaijan or in Turkey. Usually they rotate a year. So what was different about this particular exercise? Like I said, they combined the smaller exercises that they normally do throughout the year into one big exercise. That's number one. And number two, of course, the amount of hardware, especially Air Force, Turkish Air Force involved was more than at any point, I believe, since 2001. Back in 2001, there was this little reported but significant naval skirmish between the Iranian Navy and actually British petroleum vessel in the Caspian Sea. And there were some flights by Iranian helicopters along the border. So as a show of support for Azerbaijan, Turkish government at the time dispatched, I think, close to a squadron of Turkish stars, the special crew, to fly over Baku in show of support. And this time, Turkish government dispatched, I believe, 6, which is about a half a squadron, 6 F-16s, which is the largest number of F-16s they ever brought to Azerbaijan. And they did some flights over Ganja in the western part of Azerbaijan, close to the Armenian border. At the same time, they brought in, I think, roughly 3 helicopters. Five helicopters. One was in 2 attack helicopters in Baku area and 2 transport and 1 attack helicopter in Nakhchivan. That sort of participated in this joint ground exercises as ground support for 2 Turkish commando companies that came, one to Nakhchivan, one to Baku, and they sort of practiced capturing a height and holding a height, has been sort of the type of, combat activity that transpired in the recent number of years between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So Turkish government wanted to show support for Azerbaijan. So it was mostly a flag waving kind of exercise. There was a lot of flag waving as in years past, but also they showed that they have this airlift capability, that they can bring half a squadron of F-16, which is not a small number, of course, and could change the dynamics in terms of air dominance with Armenia now that Armenia actually has aircraft, modern aircraft. But it seems to me that the primary function is sort of deterring Armenia from perhaps taking more steps that infringe on Azerbaijan. And in case there is a collapse in Azerbaijani defenses, Turkey would come in and sort of support Azerbaijan in that case. In terms of what Armenia and Russia were getting out of it, of course, there is also this whole element of Turkish weapons sales to Azerbaijan, weapons transfers to Azerbaijan that deal primarily at this point with drone technology. And this Bayraktar and Anka drones that Turkey is now building on her own. There are some potential restrictions on transfers because those drones actually use European engines, or at least one of them does. But that process is underway. I wouldn't be surprised if Turkish government just ignores the restrictions placed by the suppliers.
Emil, do we ever need to worry about all of this arsenal which is being displayed staying in Azerbaijan and not going back to where they came from?
I don't think that is a big issue at this point because, like as you saw, these things could be deployed within days and operational within days. So we're past sort of the old notions of and the need to be based in Nakhchivan or based in Baku or somewhere. Those things can change very quickly. You have airlift capability you didn't have before, and it would be, I think, from just perspective of both Turkish military planning and also Azerbaijani political position, not to have a permanent Turkish presence, but to have some kind of ready airlift capability. Turkey is engaged on a lot of fronts, as you know, throughout the Middle East, so they don't have infinite military capacity to just keep it everywhere. And if they don't have to, it doesn't seem to me like they're eager to have a military presence in Azerbaijan. Of course, politically, that would be an irritant with Russia.
So this is very interesting when you say that this whole thing is a flag-waving warning, basically, to Armenia not to encroach on Azerbaijan. The July skirmishes that happened were not initiated by Armenia, but the active deterrence doctrine or strategy possibly gained a little bit of heights, right? Is that what they are responding to?
It's hard to pinpoint who started, in this situation, because, there is, from what I can see, the campaign or the operation was started by Armenia. I think that's pretty clear in terms of moving into that particular position they didn't hold before. And, with knowledge that would probably create tension with Azerbaijan because that position sat on the supply route to other Azerbaijani positions that, were very important for them. And in terms of who opened fire first, it's hard to tell, but might be Armenian side as well. I don't know. But that's not even just that. It's the way the whole skirmish had proceeded. And actually there were two kind of sets of skirmishes that Armenia took initiative in both of those skirmishes. So there is concern that the Armenian government is much more aggressive in its posture, concerned by Azerbaijan. And as a result, you have this exercise, you have that, renewed pledges of support by Turkey.
Additionally, there was this near-comical episode this past week about armaments which Baku accused Serbia of selling to Armenia. Then Serbia's president said that since Armenia was not under any sanctions, Serbia had sold some arms to them and then 10 times as much more to Azerbaijan as well in order to keep their military industry alive. Still, the whole thing we're talking about here is just a few $1 million worth of armaments. What do you make of this? Is this all performative on the part of Turkey and Azerbaijan to show that they will harass anyone dealing with Armenia?
Well, that's the work of the diplomats. They have to harass. What it tells me is that Armenian diplomats are not doing enough of this. And this has been Azerbaijan's policy for a while. I remember maybe more than 6-7 years ago, there were reports that Moldova and Ukraine were selling some weapons to Armenia, and Azerbaijan really leaned heavy on both Moldova and Ukraine to undermine those sales. And happened with other countries as well. So, where is Armenian government doing this with Israel? You have, Azerbaijan threatening to use Israeli missiles against nuclear power plant. And finally, you had a statement from foreign minister about it, but I don't think it's been nearly enough in terms of, Armenia trying to engage whatever resources it has in terms of friends in Israel and otherwise. To try to restrict at least or delay or whatever, do something to the pipeline that exists between Israel and Azerbaijan. And Israel is different from other major suppliers to Azerbaijan compared to, say, Russia, Belarus, or Turkey, or China, because China is also involved. China is a major supplier of technology to Turkey and Belarus. But in those countries, there is not a political system or political process that Armenian friends of Armenia could participate in. In terms of Israel, there's a political process. There is a coalition government. There is a multiple number of parties in Knesset that have different positions on this. And I haven't seen any evidence of Armenia sort of, there's obviously they declared that they're opening the embassy and this process of the open. But the embassy is, again, it's not, you don't have to have an embassy to be able to do some things, it's not like it's 19th century. Same with, military bases. So I say that it's not comical. It's serious that the Azerbaijani government is using whatever levers they have to try to undermine, military transfers to Armenia. And Armenian government not been doing this for decades.
Thank you, Emil.
So in environmental news, the Amulsar issue was again in the news this week. While we plan to cover that in a future dedicated episode, I wanted to talk about a little bit a related issue, which is the Mashtots Park issue, which also was in the news. And this is where Marutian authorized building on a new cafe at the park. To me, this incident is interesting because sometimes it's seen as a precursor or a prototype to the 2018 events. So I wanted to ask Alen if he knows more about us and he can elucidate us.
Thanks, Ovik. So I was just looking into this, and it looks like a couple of months ago, construction started in Mashtots Park, and last week there were photos that emerged on social media that showed a few trees that were cut. And then we started getting justification coming out of the mayor's office about why these trees were cut. My understanding is that there was a cafe at that location. Actually, maybe it's best to go back to 2012 and start from there. So in 2012, there was a plan to open several shops in Mashtots Park. And at the time, there were a lot of protests against that because it was going to result in cutting several trees. And this was sort of the beginning of civic activism in Armenia, at least on a large scale. The one only incident before that I remember that was prominent was the Turkey-Azerbaijan waterfall. The 2012 Mashtots Park, it was considered one of the big victories for civic activism because protesters stopped the construction of shops and cafes in that area and stopped the cutting of trees. At the time, 𝐶𝐸 𝐶𝐸, president, showed up and he told the mayor, 𝐶𝐸 it doesn't look nice, and then they decided to cancel the project, and they only built one cafe in that area, and they also just cleaned up the whole park and made it look appealing. But so that one cafe apparently was under lease until 2015 when ownership was given to the owner of the cafe. Essentially, they moved from a lease to owning the property. And so the justification out of the mayor's office was that they basically went back to a long-term lease so that in 2040 that area would be returned to public use. And they also said that these trees that were being cut were not healthy. They were not healthy trees. So it just sounded like a bunch of excuses being made in my mind. For one thing, they were saying that the area of the cafe is being reduced, which doesn't, they said that they're tearing down the old cafe, building a new one that's going to be nicer. But that didn't line up with the fact that they're cutting down even more trees. A lot of people criticized them because they said that these trees were in fact healthy. Another interesting thing that Haik Marutian said that caused a lot of outrage is he said that people criticized him for not holding public forums and public discussions about this project, and he said that those discussions happen during the election campaign. Once you elect us, we have the right to do what we want. And this was another instance of the government saying something like this, where you gave us your vote, now trust us to do the right thing, which is just insane. And the other thing was he said, if I got what I wanted, some of these projects wouldn't happen. But we sometimes just have to follow the laws, and the laws don't allow us to do these things, which is absurd because a year ago in Opera, the Opera cafes, they just made a sort of a unilateral decision without really talking to anybody. I mean, they disregarded the laws and they just took over a bunch of cafes in Opera, which maybe we might not even be against, but there's certainly a double standard here. So they tore down the cafes in Opera, put trees in those places, whereas in this case, they're cutting down trees to build a cafe. So it's kind of a lot of hypocrisy, I think.
Did they actually put trees in the opera house, or is it just like a paved area right now?
No, there's actually it looks pretty nice. There's a lot of grass and trees. It's not bad. Sorry, and I just wanted to mention one other thing in this context is a little bit unrelated, but there was a report. I think HEDC published a report recently about 11.6 thousand hectares, I think, of forested area that had, the trees were significantly damaged by pests, mainly because in the past 2 years, the proper processes were not conducted, the procedures were not undertaken to apply pesticide to these forests, which, again, is along the same lines. The government announces that they're going to they're going to plant 10 million trees in a year, which is, by itself is almost impossible as far as I understand. And just make a gimmicky statement, but then when it comes to actually executing, not only did they recently say that 10 million is not going to be planted, it turns out that, I don't know, potentially thousands or maybe tens of thousands, I don't know, a significant amount of trees have been damaged. I don't know how many of them are beyond repair, but certainly that doesn't. It's not a good show of caring for the environment. Whereas this government, kind of one of the things that they came to power on was protecting the environment, addressing environmental issues.
I have a quick follow-up. Have they resolved all of the ownership questions about the cafes?
Do you mean the other cafes in Opera?
Yeah, in that entire area, yes.
This whole thing started, if I remember correctly, it was February of last year, and they said that eventually they would tear down most of the cafes that are directly in front of Opera. Last I heard, they've only really torn down 2 or 3 of the cafes. The other ones are still there.
That is also what I've heard. Thank you. This week, cybersecurity specialist Samvel Mardirosyan announced that Azerbaijani hackers had penetrated into government servers, getting access to 55 terabytes of information. The NSS investigation continues, and we do not know much more on this topic. Hovig, what do we know about this intrusion, and what are your main concerns here?
There have been various instances in the past where Azeri hackers have either leaked information or have defaced websites, and this happens in the background constantly. Specifically, what happened in this incident was that the Azerbaijani hackers published a screenshot of what appears to be the management console that administrators use to manage servers. And now I want to preface this by saying that Samvel Martirosyan thinks that the attackers didn't get access to this management console, but instead got access to the screenshot itself, probably through someone's email, like by going through someone's email. However, due to the nature of the incident, it's very difficult for anyone outside the government to get a true sense of what really happened, especially since the NSS itself has not publicized any details. So while I'm inclined to believe Martirosyan, to me, there's still a possibility of this being a serious incident. Now, when I looked at the screenshot, it included details about server names that looked realistic to me, including installations of what is called Mulberry, which is the government's electronic document management system, and various other servers. And in my opinion, I think in general, the security of government IT infrastructure is in a problematic state because the government can't compete with the private sector in terms of qualified employees. And many times, IT security experts that end up offering a helping hand, it's based on altruism or some kind of voluntary effort, such as what Samvel is doing. He has a group of people who know about IT security, and he does a good job of externalizing anything that comes up. To be fair, this is not a problem unique to Armenia, but it is, I think, severe in Armenia in that respect, not having qualified labor.
So, Hovig, do you think that these are more technologically involved issues or more issues regarding training and personnel?
I think technology is secondary here. I think that if you have qualified people who know, about the technology, they can they can advise the government. But here it's more of just the fact that, a qualified software developer, for instance, or even a server administrator, they can make thousands of dollars a month working in the private sector. Whereas I think that they can't even, they'll make much less than working for the government.
Do you have any main recommendations which, in the short term, the government could start looking into to mitigate these issues?
Before I sort of give my recommendations, I will also mention, as I said, there are numerous incidents where sort of this evidence of actually compromise was more incontrovertible. For instance, in June, Martirosyan mentioned there was a spate of 6 incidents where personal details of 10,000 COVID patients were leaked. And to me, this is more worrisome than the government incident. And there hasn't been any public resolution to the incidents. So no breach notifications were sent out, and no sense that the vulnerabilities have been closed or how even they got into them. Most likely was through email. But I think the 3 things that the government should do about this is to dramatically consider increasing salaries of IT employees just to be on par with industry. I think Armenia sorely needs some good laws about security breach notifications, and in general, just like stringent IT security standards and the ability to provide oversight from the government, at least for the government agencies. And those standards should be focused on prevention of security incidents. Besides just notification about breaches, there should be some strong standards that the government can enforce on its own branches and ministries.
Thank you.
Okay. So moving on, there was news this week that President Ahmet Sarkisyan's office had mentioned that they signed a new law governing media in what is called the public digital multiplex. So among some of the changes, the law restricts operation of foreign channels in the public multiplex, and it requires a bilateral agreement between countries to do so. But that's just one article of it. There are other issues, such as the law defines penalties about something called, what is called hate speech, but it doesn't really go into how to define hate speech and how to apply it in a balanced manner. Also, the law limits the number of channels that can be part of the multiplex, which raised concerns from opposition that there is an intention to deprive pro-opposition media from a license. Emil, what do you make of this law? Whose broadcasters are a national threat to Armenia's national security?
Well, it's clear that it's the Russian broadcasters are the most sort of problematic for this government, and derives from the fact that there's been a number of reports on different Russian TV channels that directly attacked Nikol Pashinyan, attacked the government in various ways. If you look at last time, Armenian government was trying to restrict foreign broadcasters. This was back in, I think, 2007, shortly before, while the election campaign was happening for 2008 election. And at the time, the target was, of course, the Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe. The Armenian government didn't like their coverage of them, so tried to restrict it. And in this case, certainly the current government doesn't like the Russian government's coverage, doesn't like its interviews with the Kocharian or whatever, and wants to restrict it. If you look at it objectively, the current place that the Russian TV channels have in Armenia is unusually broad. I don't think at this point, aside maybe from Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, most other nations, former Soviet nations, don't have Russian TV, Russian government-controlled TV on non-cable networks. And I think that partly has to do, mostly it has to do with the fact that most of those countries are dictatorships. Places like Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, they want to tightly control any messages to their population, so they ban it for that reason. And then they have countries that have kind of hostile relations with Russia, Georgia, Ukraine. They restrict it for reasons that I don't like the Russian propaganda. Armenia so far has not had that issue because the Russian government coverage of Armenia events until the revolution was fairly friendly to the previous Armenian government, so they didn't care. But of course, it's different now. So the Armenian government is moving to restrict Russian TV presence. And, of course, Nikol Pashinyan, being a former political pundit, journalist, takes media very seriously, and he believes, I'm sure that, and there's probably some truth to it, that his campaign against the Armenian governments over more than 2 decades finally culminated in his victory in 2018. And he, I think, will be very, very careful in terms of trying to control the media market in Armenia, trying to control, messaging that might be targeting him. Of course, there's a whole community of people in Armenia that believe that there should be a free market and government shouldn't have a monopoly, and the tension will continue and will continue around this bill as well.
Emil, I think that there was a statement from Dikran Hagopian, who's the head of the National Television and Radio Commission, that this was not aimed at Russia, and that former bilateral agreements between the two countries would regulate this issue.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's the official message. They wouldn't want to come out and say we're doing this to spite the Russians or to restrict the Russian influence. that would be running contrary to official policy. But from Russian perspective, I actually have an article right now. The headline is "Government of Armenia has restricted the broadcast of Russian and other foreign channels." So that's how they're taking it, and obviously that's what it is.
And besides giving license to foreign governments, I think there is also a requirement that the content itself most of it must be in Armenian. So even if I think a license is provided to CNN or Sputnik News, for instance, I think there will be some kind of a requirement for them to translate the content into Armenian.
I think looking at it legitimately, objectively, the Russian television has become outrageous in its content in general, in terms of political content. Very, very tightly controlled by the government, and less of information, more propaganda. But of course, you look at it in a larger context, and you sort of realize that people will get that content if they want to get it. It's not like anybody in Armenia at this point is restricted to television. So if anything, this sort of moves, they create some, tensions short term, but I don't think long term changes much.
In the context of media laws, I wanted to add that also on Wednesday, Turkey's parliament passed a law regulating social media that critics have said will increase censorship and help authorities silence dissent. The law requires foreign social media sites to appoint a Turkish-based representative to address authorities' concerns over content and includes deadlines for removal of material. And to add insult to injury, the passage of this law was announced by Parliament on Twitter.
I'm sure everything is announced on Twitter in Turkey. The Turkish-Azerbaijani exercises, they were also announcing on Twitter. So.
Finally, I want to take a personal moment about the terrible events in Beirut this week. Asbet Kochigyan, we talked earlier about the politics, the economy of the Armenian community in Beirut. But you and I are also Beirutsies. I grew up less than 2 kilometers from the port, which was ground zero for this blast. And our apartment had a balcony with a gorgeous unobstructed view of the entire port. The cruise liners that docked regularly, it was beautiful, the grain silo. When I heard about the horrible explosion and realized where it was and how devastating it was, it really hit me very deep in places I'd forgotten. I almost felt it as if the blast was on my body physically. A cold sweat came over me. And I thought, about the effects of this thing on my building, on my street where we used to play as kids. And it took me back to the first day of the war when a giant cannon was placed on our building. And the first outgoing shot brought every window down and glass was flying everywhere over 8 floors of our building. I've been in touch with relatives I still have in Beirut. I've been in touch with Katya Peltekian, our Groong partner in Beirut, who is thankfully okay despite a lot of damage to her living spaces. But my heart hurts for Lebanon and its people and our community there. Asbet, I know you have relatives who are still in Beirut. How is everyone? And how did you take the news?
Well, as you said, it's shocking but not unexpected. This is something that the story of Lebanon in the last 30 years, where you would end up having explosions, car bombs, skirmishes between militias and so on. Of course, the magnitude is something else. My relatives and the house that I grew up in, and the one that I visit frequently, the last time was last year when I was on a research trip to Syria and Lebanon, was less than 0.2 kilometers, less than a mile away from the harbor itself. As you said, you could see the unobstructed view of the harbor and the sound of the ships actually blowing their horn on New Year. That was part of me growing up. Overall, my first reaction after I followed, and I've been following the news closely, is to what extent this is not anymore an external or military thing. This is basically gross negligence from a government that has lost credibility and has been losing credibility for the last decade or so, if not more. Overall, I think I'm trying to be optimistic. Overall, the destruction is unprecedented in terms of Lebanon, in terms of Beirut itself. The fact that you have 300,000, as of now, homeless people, that people have lost their homes, people have lost lives, more importantly, and the lack of strong reaction by the government is what fueling anti-government sentiments. Talking with people, analysts, friends, and following news, one of the things that some people are saying that this could be, with all its disastrous outcome, this also could be a turning point to reset Lebanese politics, life, society, and economy. I am still following. This is an ongoing thing. Just recently, there was news that the Lebanese protesters stormed into the foreign ministry. The anger, the frustration that has been building up is just is erupted against the government. So all in all, that's the overall assessment.
So I can see that this is a huge topic, and I think we are going to take this up in a future episode. We will continue following this and the other issues as they unfold in coming days and weeks. For now, that is all the time we have. Thank you, everyone. Talk to you next week.
That concludes our program. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from the previous week. We look forward to your feedback and even your suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website, groong.org. That's Groong. Or on our Facebook page, ANN Groong, or in our Facebook group, Groong Armenian News Network. Please subscribe, like, and share our content on your favorite social media platform to help us reach a wider audience. We are available on most popular platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. I'm 𝐀𝐤𝐿𝐿, and on behalf of everyone in this episode, I wish you a good week. Thank you for listening, and talk to you next week.